Hello, my name is Jessica. Thank you for joining me in this video. The weather is getting very warm in Korea finally. It looks like spring is finally here. I hope you guys are enjoying the nice weather. For this video, we will look at the Teen Times from March 20th. The newspaper number is 572. The section we will look at is debate, and the headline for this week, should alcohol be banned? Let's go over the introduction where we can summarize these 5 points, starting with point number 1, the dangers of alcohol. Now, the dangers of alcohol have long been documented. Alcohol-related road accidents, violence, suicides, and diseases kill millions of people around the world every year. And long-term alcohol misuse has serious effects on physical and mental health. Chronic excess alcohol intake or dependence can lead to a number of diseases such as liver disease, cancer, panic disorder, schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, and cardiovascular disease. Now, my second point, alcohol consumption amongst teenagers in Korea. In Korea, a country with a relatively lax alcohol law, a study recently released by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention found that more than 82% of adolescents, those in middle and high school, could buy alcoholic beverages without difficulty, despite the government's efforts to prevent underage drinking. In addition, although the underage drinking rate has been on the decline, the alcohol risk rate among teenagers has steadily increased to 47.2% in 2010. The alcohol risk rate is 5 small glasses or more for males in one session per month and 3 or more for females. Nearly 2 of 10 minors got drunk on one day or more in February 2012, and nearly 4 out of 10 created problems due to drinking twice or more in the last year. Now, the report also found that more female students drink harmful amounts at 51.5% and cause more problems than male students at 40.2%. Now let's look at the third point, an integral part of society. However, unlike most mind-altering drugs, alcohol is one of the most widely used drug substances in the world. In most countries, adults are allowed to buy and consume alcohol with very few restrictions. While consumption patterns vary dramatically according to country, alcoholic beverages have been an integral part of societies for thousands of years. They also serve as a variety of functions, which is my fourth point. Alcohol is a product that has provided a variety of functions for people throughout all of history. From the earliest times to the present, alcohol has played an important role in religion and worship. Historically, alcoholic beverages have served as sources of needed nutrients and have been widely used for their medicinal and antiseptic properties. They also play an important role in enhancing the enjoyment and quality of life. Now, while alcohol has always been misused by a minority of drinkers, it has proved to be beneficial to most. Now, my last point. What do you think about banning alcohol? This is a very controversial issue, and countries that have done so in the past, such as the US, face much backlash from the public. Now, for this debate, I will side with the cons and say that alcohol should not be banned. Alright, in this slide, let's look at the first statement of the cons. In this section, I will talk in detail about the U.S. prohibition, starting with its history. Now let's go back all the way back to 1830. During this time, the average American over 15 years old consumed nearly 7 gallons of pure alcohol a year. Now this is 3 times as much as Americans drink today. And alcohol abuse, primarily by men, was wreaking havoc on the lives of many people. And remember, this was a time when women had few legal rights and were completely dependent on their husbands for sustenance and support. Now, the country's first serious anti-alcohol movement grew out of fervor for reforms that swept the nation in the 1830s and 1840s. Many abolitionists fighting to rid the country of slavery came to see drink as an equally great evil to be eradicated. Now, the temperance movement, which is rooted in America's Protestant churches, first urged moderation, then encouraged drinkers to help each other to resist the temptation, and ultimately demanded that local, state, and eventually the national government prohibit alcohol outright. Now, my second point, the 18th Amendment. Finally, in January 1919, the country ratified the 18th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Under this amendment, the manufacture, transportation, and sale of alcohol were prohibited by federal law. Now, the cons say that a ban on alcohol would be impractical. I agree with them based on what happened during the Prohibition. Now let's go over some of the examples. My third point, the economic consequences. Let's first look at the economic consequences of the Prohibition. On the whole, it was largely negative. The closing of breweries, distilleries, and saloons, or which we call bars today, led to the elimination of thousands of jobs across country, and in turn, thousands of more jobs were eliminated for barrel makers, truckers, waiters, and other related trades. Now, the unintended economic consequences of the Prohibition didn't stop there either. One of the most profound effects of the Prohibition was on government tax revenues. Before Prohibition, many states relied heavily on taxes and liquor sales to fund their budgets. For example, in New York in the early 1900s, almost 75% of the state's revenue was derived from liquor taxes. With Prohibition in effect, that revenue obviously was immediately lost. At the national level, Prohibition cost the federal government a total of $11 billion in lost tax revenue, while costing more than $300 million to enforce this law. Now, my fourth point, the overall negative impact. More seriously, Prohibition turned law-abiding citizens into criminals, made a mockery of the justice system, caused illicit drinking to seem glamorous and fun, encouraged neighborhood gangs to become national crime syndicates, permitted government officials to bend and sometimes even break the law, and fostered cynicism and hypocrisy that corroded the social contract all across the country. Now, thugs became celebrities, responsible authority was rendered impotent, and social mores that were in place for more than a century were obliterated. Especially among the young, and most especially among young women, liquor consumption rocketed. And as effective enforcement of this alcohol ban during the Prohibition era proved to be very difficult, this led to widespread flouting of the law. And my last point, historians see Prohibition as a massive failure. Prohibition was intended to improve, even to ennoble the lives of all Americans, to protect individuals, families, and societies at large from the devastating effects of alcohol abuse. However, most historians agree that Prohibition failed to achieve what it was set out to do, and that its unintended consequences were far more reaching than its few benefits. For these reasons, and as it's almost impossible to enforce such a law, alcohol should not be banned. Now let's go over the con's second statement with these 4 points, starting with point number 1, infringing people's civil liberties. Now, a ban on alcohol violates people's civil liberties to an unacceptable degree. I firmly believe that the government has no right to tell its citizens whether they can or they cannot drink, except for when they're about to get behind of a car, right? An alcoholic may be potentially harming themselves, but people should be free to choose to do that. My second point will create a massive black market. Now, a ban on alcohol would also create a huge black market. During Prohibition, a profitable, often violent black market for alcohol flourished during this time. Organized crime received a major boost as powerful gangs and members of the mafia corrupted law enforcement agencies. In essence, Prohibition provided a financial basis for organized crimes to flourish. Now, my third point, during the U.S. Prohibition, they saw a rise in criminal activity. Rather than reducing crime, Prohibition transformed cities into battlegrounds between opposing gangs. In a study of more than 30 major U.S. cities during 1920 and 1921, the number of crimes increased by 24%. Additionally, theft and burglaries increased by 9%, homicide by 12.7%, assaults and batteries rose by 13%, and drug addiction by 44.6%. Most historians speculate that this was largely the result of the violent black market. My last point led to worse social conditions. Despite the belief that of the prohibitionist movement that by outlawing alcohol, crime would surely be reduced, the reality was that it led to worse social conditions than were experienced prior to Prohibition as a result of more lethal forms of alcohol, increased crime rates, and the establishment of a black market dominated by criminal organizations. Now let's look at the final statement of the cons. I have 4 points here. Let's start with point number 1, the economic benefits of alcohol. Now, commercial alcohol production can and does have a substantial positive economic and social impact. Both in developed and developing countries, it provides employment opportunities and stable income to many people, and it is a significant source of public revenue to governments through its taxes. Now, my second point, the consequences to world's economy. The drinks industry is an enormous global industry, and the closure of such companies would wreak havoc on the world economy. No effect on crimes, my third point. The pros say that alcohol is a contributing factor to a huge proportion of crimes, but I don't believe this is the underlying case of violent crimes. As Americans saw during the Prohibition, the crime rates rose overall. And I agree with the cons when they say that human beings are naturally inclined towards violence and conflict. And my last point, important in societies. Because alcohol has played a vital role, consumption of alcohol in moderation has really been questioned throughout most of recorded time. Now, people should just be smart and practice moderation. Banning alcohol entirely is not an effective idea. Now, what do you think about this issue? Pick a side and come up with your own arguments. Then have a discussion with your friends, your family members, or your classmates. Now, thank you for joining me today in this video. I hope you guys learned a lot, and I will see you next time. Thank you.